And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mamdani, right? Okay, who's like a straight up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, you know, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free...
Bill Maher just went off on Zohran Mamdani, and the whole moment turned into pure entertainment chaos. The late-night provocateur tore into the New York lawmaker's ultra-progressive vision, saying his win almost feels like a free campaign promo for conservatives. Maher's attack was sharp non-stop, and brutally funny, the kind of commentary that doesn't let up for a second. One moment you're watching analysis, the next it feels like a comedy roast, and honestly, it moves so fast you can easily miss the best parts. So yeah, this is one of those clips where you don't want to blink, because the energy is wild from start to finish.
Most popular politician on the left.
AOC? I don't know.
One of, but who's, you know, Bernie is,
Bernie, yeah.
Bernie is, I mean, he's not a capitalist, you know?
No, he's not. And he's also not president.
He's not, but
never would be.
But neither is Mamdani.
No, no, but he will, trust me, he will be featured in the campaign commercials.
But they're going to feature people, they boogeyman everybody.
Yeah, but you don't have to boogeyman him. He does it to himself.
Maher is not wrong. Republicans do not need to invent a scary version of Zohran Mamdani, because in their view, he already creates that image through his own messaging every time he speaks. With Mamdani now moving toward a possible New York mayoral win, critics argue that his rise could become a major political advantage for Republicans, a kind of loud warning sign that Democrats are drifting into what they call ideological fantasy territory. Mamdani describes himself as a democratic socialist, but that explanation mainly satisfies his supporters. Maher, on the other hand, is not convinced by that framing. To him, Mamdani represents a kind of idealistic left-wing thinking that may sound noble on paper, but ends up giving conservatives an easy and ready-made talking point.
It must be horrible for a guy like you, who you spent your whole life talking about how government tries to do too much, which it does, and spends too much. And here you have Trump, who is the Republican, who is aggrandizing more power than anybody, as we just talked about. And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mamdani, right? Okay, who's like a straight up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, you know, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free buses.
I want him to win.
You want him to win.
At first glance, the pitch shines with a utopian glow full of warm promises and polished optimism that looks like it belongs on a magazine cover. But when you pull at the edges, that fantasy starts to shift into something much heavier. Sure, dreamers may feel inspired, yet for those who have seen socialist experiments fall apart, it feels like history repeating itself in a different costume, dressed up as progress and once again wrapped in hope.
I think every 20 years or so.
Wait.
We need every 20 years or so, we need a conspicuous, confined experiment with socialism so we can crack it up again. Socialist slogan used to be, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. The new socialist slogan is, trust us, this time it won't be a mess.
Socialist projects have a long history of collapsing so often that many people treat the idea like a lesson learned the hard way, except for some younger audiences who are drawn in by promises of fairness and limitless equality. The real issue is not just greed, but how human behavior actually works. People respond to challenge, to incentive, and to the belief that effort leads to reward. When you remove competition and flatten outcomes, productivity tends to slow, systems get bloated, inefficiency grows. And what starts as a vision of equality can slowly turn into stagnation. History has repeated this pattern many times. When the state tries to control too much, the system becomes heavy and less responsive. Critics argue that Mamdani's proposals, which include expanded state programs and broader government involvement, may sound appealing in theory but become difficult in practice, because without space for entrepreneurship, trade, and independent ambition, growth loses momentum, and over time equality risks turning into shared frustration rather than shared prosperity.
When the post-war Labour government in Britain was about to get started, one of their leading lights was a socialist named Nurian Bevan. He said, what could go wrong? He said, we have a nation bedded on coal, surrounded by fish. It would take an organizational genius to have a shortage of either. In 3 years, they had a shortage.
Britain is often used as a warning example in this debate, where post-war policies expanded state control and aimed for greater equality and shared prosperity, but over time critics argue that heavy bureaucracy, declining efficiency, and weak industrial performance led to economic stagnation, especially by the 1970s, when the country was widely described as the sick man of Europe. Later market reforms in the 1980s are credited by supporters with restoring growth, though interpretations of this period remain deeply divided depending on political perspective.
Saying that we're going to make a sanctuary city for LGBTQIA plus New Yorkers, beyond saying that we're going to establish an office of LGBTQIA plus affairs, is also that we're going to provide $65 million in funding for gender-affirming care, the same amount of funding that the federal government threatened to pull out from local providers for that kind of.
Maher worries Zohran Mamdani could become a political trapdoor for Democrats, something that pulls the party away from the center and into electoral risk. He argues that when Democrats lean too far left, they risk losing moderate voters who often decide elections. Many people supported Donald Trump as a reaction to what they viewed as progressive overreach, including debates around youth gender-affirming care, yet Mamdani appears to many critics to be pushing further into those same cultural flashpoints. Critics also say he supports major private fundraising efforts tied to these policy areas, which they see as doubling down on some of the most divisive issues in American politics. For Democrats who value pragmatism over ideological purity, Mamdani's approach is seen by opponents not as bold, but as risky and potentially damaging, offering Republicans an easy argument that the left has moved away from common sense and everyday.
He has attacked you personally and publicly like this.
He's not a socialist. He's a communist, okay? This is not a socialist, man. This is a communist.
I don't like to see a communist become mayor, I will tell you that.
I call him my little communist. He's my little communist mayor. We should never be in a position where we're talking about a communist. We're gonna end up with a communist mayor. It's not even believable, my beautiful New York. I think if a communist takes over New York City, I think that's a gift to the Republican.
No sugarcoating it. Trump does not need to paint Zohran Mamdani as some political specter, because Mamdani often generates that perception himself through his own messaging. He has floated ideas like government-run grocery stores and free city-wide transit proposals that place the state deep into everyday economic life. While he identifies as a democratic socialist, his tone and policy direction often sound closer to a far left governing model. Critics argue that whether the intentions are good or not, the platform fits neatly into a broader narrative that Democrats are drifting towards socialism, and in politics, as the saying goes, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, people tend to call it a duck.
If it waddles like a duck and speaks fluent duck, well, you know the rest.
This vision of democratic socialism, it's one that often comes back to what Martin Luther King said decades ago. A vision of, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, there must be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country. Here in New York City, wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, 1 in 4 are in poverty. 500,000 kids go to sleep hungry every night. It's untenable to live with this kind of a divide. We have to actually have a politics that puts...
When you zoom in, Mamdani's pitch may feel fresh to some, but critics see it as a familiar cycle of political messaging recycled from the past. Lofty promises of fairness, equal opportunity, and shared prosperity delivered in powerful language meant to inspire belief, yet often stripped of practical detail. History, for opponents of this view, shows a repeated pattern where early enthusiasm fades and the realities of implementation bring heavier state control and slower economic momentum. They argue that this can limit individual drive and weaken innovation, especially in fast-moving cities like New York. From that perspective, America's success has been built more on open competition, entrepreneurship, and personal ambition than on centrally managed economic planning, and they warn that moving too far away from that model risks repeating old mistakes. Bill Maher, in his own way, often frames these debates through humor, but beneath it he signals a concern that these trends could lead to outcomes the country has already seen before.
To the memory of my aunt, who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab.
Well, it wasn't so much his aunt as his dad's cousin, but, semantics. Douglas, is he ready to lead?
No, in absolutely no way is he ready to lead, and that was just another reminder of it. This is such a self-involved little narcissist with so little...
And that's the playbook. Critics are pointing to crafting emotionally charged, carefully polished narratives that lean heavily on sentiment and symbolism to build support. It's an old political technique refined for the modern media age, where storytelling often matters as much as policy detail. In that framing, Zohran Mamdani's public image becomes less about specifics and more about a broader moral narrative centered on empathy, identity, and progress, which naturally resonates with certain audiences. And activist circle supporters may see it as giving voice to communities they feel are overlooked, while critics argue that this style can sometimes prioritize messaging over practical execution. From that viewpoint, what looks like inspiring storytelling to one group can look like performance politics to another, and the disagreement comes down to whether the emphasis is on emotional resonance or measurable outcomes.
He even decides to turn the memory of 9/11 and the 3,000 Americans of that day into a story about his aunt and the subway. It's interesting, like so many things that this smarmy candidate does, he makes it about himself and it all turns out to be untrue anyway. It seems to the extent that he had any such aunt in question, she wasn't in New York at the time, and in any case, didn't wear the...
Turns out that warm and glowing origin story around Zohran Mamdani looks different when examined closely, but in deep blue New York political loyalty often matters as much as scrutiny, and he appears positioned to move forward despite the cracks. Critics point to the real test will come when campaign-style promises meet the reality of governing a complex city like New York, where slogans are easy but execution is difficult to them. His rise is less a success story and more a warning sign of ideas that sound appealing in theory but may struggle in practice, and opponents argue that if this direction continues, the impact could extend beyond the city and shape the broader image of the Democratic Party.